Sweet. So we track community call topics in a big spreadsheet as we hear requests and as things come through in surveys and polls that we have in various settings within the larger network. And one topic that comes up quite regularly is staffing. And staffing involves quite a bit of things. Recruitment and retention were the ones that we lifted up initially for this call today. So we definitely want to talk about those. But as we started to talk about staffing and how folks manage that within their centers, we started to think about all the other ways that staffing meshes in with governance, with budget, with external contractors, all the different ways that this work is being done with other facilitators, other programs that come in and use the space at various centers. So we want to make sure that these kind of calls address the concerns that you're holding and that we're able to touch on things that are top of mind for you, bigger concerns for your center at this time. And those may be different for everyone who's on the call. So I'm hoping that we can go through this topic with some openness to hear the concerns that are top of mind, and also some willingness to drill in on some of the subtopics that I think are really key for folks who have expressed their needs in the past. And so how do you recruit at a rural center where there isn't a big workforce? How do you retain when the work is challenging or it's spotty? And how do you establish a healthy budget where the admin expenses are appropriate to the size of the work that you're doing? So I'm really grateful that Nanci Lee is here from Tatamagouche Center, and also a member of our stewardship circle here at RCC. And Nanci has been really passionate about the benchmarking piece, establishing a better understanding across the network of how our centers approach many different questions, and being able to see through data where there are healthy balances that the rest of us can learn from by sharing our information together. So Nanci and I are going to hold this together. I'm going to bring up some of the questions that I've heard in past calls, and then Nanci will help us go through some of the data that we collected in a recent poll where we talked about budgeting for staffing and how different centers are managing that. Nanci, is there anything that you want to share before we get in? Actually, okay, you had asked me already to share a bit about benchmarking at a larger scale, and maybe I've done that. Can you share a little bit about what you were hoping for with this poll and what you might be talking about, so we can have that on our thoughts?
Sure. Thanks, Ben. And hi, everyone. Afternoon here in Mi'kma'ki. I'm up on the north shore of Nova Scotia, Canada. Yes, as Ben said, I'm really passionate about benchmarking. I've done benchmarking in a previous life, work with cooperatives, and I just know the power of being able in a peer group to look at meaningful ratios and trends in order, and today we're looking at staffing in particular, but I'm really interested in ways that we can A, create meaningful peer groups, and B, benchmark within them and have some good conversations. Yeah, so I'll come back to that in more detail, but.
Thank you, Nanci. Yeah. Maybe we can do just a little bit of going around the room to hear if there are specific requests that people have in mind as they're coming to this call, as they filled out the poll. A 1 minute kind of few phrases of what's on your mind as you're coming into the call, what your questions are that you're holding. And we can popcorn this. You can jump in.
Maybe I'll just lead off, Ben, from that benchmarking. For me, a question is, what would meaningful peer groups look like? What does it mean to be small, medium, and large, for example?
I can piggyback there. I'm Roxanne Ross, and I'm located in the Christine Center in Willard, Wisconsin. And to be fully transparent, I apologize. We did not submit any data. It was literally about 10 minutes ago that we were screwing around to see who might be able to join in on this, and found out from our acting director that she didn't get a chance to submit it. So I too, when you talk about what are meaningful peer groups, for me, I'm particularly interested in folks who are in a rural space Ben, you mentioned a few of those challenges there so that we have. So, and I apologize, I won't be able to stay the whole time, but thanks so much for doing this topic. I look forward to following up.
I'll go, Ben. I was thrilled to see this topic for us. We lost one of our key players here at the retreat house, key staff members, and unexpectedly retired in mid-December. So this week been focusing, or past couple weeks been focusing on job descriptions and then posting. So that whole recruitment feature, like I'm really attuned into that right now. I appreciated the survey that was sent out yesterday, and I see mainly maybe more through the RCC, the categories that Nanci talked of small, medium, large. I'm never quite sure like where I actually fit. I know how I think of ourselves, so I'd appreciate that discussion too. Thanks.
Yeah, what do you call it? I started the job yesterday, so I'm just starting as a retreat director. I'm in Citrus Heights, California, which is right next to Sacramento. Well, thank you. But I'm Father Joe Moons. I'm a passionist. We have a passion retreat center here. And already 2 people approached me about raising their salary. So, but Natalie did a very fine job. She was my predecessor. She was really outstanding. And she was great for transition. I mean, I look all over. There's post-it notes, there's things to say. She's done a very good job. So I welcome the opportunity to be with y'all.
Welcome, Joe. I'm glad you're here. Thank you.
I could chime in. I'm Denise O'Neill from St. Francis Retreat House. We're in Easton, Pennsylvania, in the Lehigh Valley. And I thought I would be the newest member, but Father Joe has that beat a little bit. I'm here 30 days, so maybe we could connect offline and share early stories. But I think I'm here for listening moments to learn as much as possible. And I'm grateful that this forum exists.
I can step in here. I'm Susan Clausen. I work with the Loretto Retreat Centers in central rural Kentucky. And we're aware that in the next 4 or 5 years, we will have a significant transition of staffing. And so we're just exploring what creative options might look like for our retreat center.
Well, I thought I was going to be the newest. I've only been on the job for 8 days. So Joe, Denise, we should all get together. I'm David MacDonald at the Osage Forest of Peace in Oklahoma. And so we've been without a full-time director for about 2.5 years. And so we're really still coming out of pandemic mode. And as a result of that, a lot of staff left or were let go. And so we're now beginning to think about, as we build things back up over the next couple of years, how do we approach reintroducing staff? Right now, there's me and a couple of housekeepers on our staff. And so what are the positions that we need to focus on first? I kind of have an idea, but I'd like to hear what other people have done, and or as you have ramped back up, what staffing positions you focused on first.
I'm Sonia, and I'm the executive director at Southern Dharma in the mountains in North Carolina, which is a Buddhist retreat center. I'm interested in knowing beyond wages and kind of conventional benefits, what sort of other forms of compensation and benefits the centers are providing to their employees.
Hello, I'm Eve from Elohe Center in North Georgia Mountains, and I am also interested in staffing, particularly kitchen staff. It seems to be the only place that we have trouble finding staffing. And so we are rural, but we are next to the second largest tourist destination in Georgia. So we are competing with all of the restaurants there for kitchen, and also how people manage. We are only open when we have retreats, which it's becoming most all the time, but like most every weekend or longer, but still it's not, we just had a month of low retreats because of the holidays. And so seeing how people manage the hourly staff with having low times.
I'm
Ready?
Scott.
Oops.
Sorry. Go ahead, Donna.
Okay. I'm Donna Lundberg. I'm with the Christine Center in Willard, Wisconsin, which is, let's see, West Central Wisconsin. We're in the middle of nowhere. And I'm just thrilled to know that there's this resource group. Thank you.
I'm Scott. I'm at LaSalle Manor Retreat Center, which is in Plano, Illinois, about an hour west of Chicago. One of the questions I'm interested in, if we can weave it into the discussion and get to it, is about outsourcing to third parties. I actually put a question on Facebook maybe like a month or 2 months ago now, because I've been having issues with hiring cleaners, and there's a number of services, janitorial services and others that I can hire. The premium is there, pay a little more, but also the reliability and some other benefits that come with that. And so curious if other people have utilized this model for either cleaning or other staffing, and benefits, downsides, pros and cons, those kinds of things. So.
Would love to hear from a couple more people if anyone else would like to share. Also seeing the comments in the chat about strategic planning and folks that have a model that's combination residential and non-residential and trying to discern the best path forward for staff. And then somebody reiterating the challenge being kitchen staff, and that some sites are unique in that they operate as both a summer camp and an outdoor school. I think those are complications that exist at a lot of sites where they're doing different things at different times of year, which require different staff.
I can go. I'm Jamie Daring. I'm with the Franciscan Sisters of Little Falls, Minnesota. We're in northwestern Minnesota. And the retreat center staff is myself. I'm a part-time person, but we are part of a larger campus of the Franciscan Sisters. So our things like hospitality are still immersed and integrated into the sisters' life. So I listen with that lens.
I'm Sister Jane Marie Kudlatz. I'm at Villa Maria Education and Spirituality Center in Villa Maria, PA, which is just right on the Ohio-Pennsylvania border. I'm here primarily, as somebody else said earlier, in a listening mode, but I also am interested in anyone that has done succession planning and planning for cross-training of employees. Because obviously with such a small staff, if somebody has or is out for months, how do you cover what that person does? And how do you train when you have so few people to do what needs to be done to also train them to pick up the pieces? That's one of the things that is critical for us.
So Nanci and I are hearing a lot of topics here, which is great, and probably some overlap and maybe an opportunity for some open space to go a little deeper in smaller groups on some of these topics and bat them around a bit with peers. But I'm curious if that's the right idea, or if there's maybe a couple things that we want to talk about as a large group first. So I'm a little bit I'm trying to feel into the breadth and depth of questions here. If folks are holding a little bit, yeah, go ahead, Nanci.
Oh, I was just going to say, Ben, I do think presenting the poll and having some discussion first, absolutely. But then maybe, there's everything from very particular, questions to more wide ranging. There might be an opportunity for smaller groups. We can see.
I like that. And we definitely have the capability for that. And thank you, Aaron, for taking detailed notes. So we're tracking these comments as they're coming in. So we'll be able to generate something back to you. I think we should go to the data just to get us a little bit of a better sense of the variety of retreat centers that are represented. We had 15 responses to this poll, and I can share it to you in a slide deck. So let me jump over to that. I thought I might share these results and then have Nanci talk a little bit more about what she's seeing, because I think we might see different things. But I wanted to show you what I saw. Nanci and I worked together on putting these questions together. So we're putting our heads together. It's collaborative. That's what we're doing here today. So the first question we asked folks was, what percentage of your organization's overall annual operating budget is staffing and including benefits as part of staffing? And we got a range here between 72 and 20%, with the average being around 49. We asked about, from that staffing budget, how would it be split between office or administrative staff versus hospitality or seasonal staff? And so the blue here is the administrative staff, quite a range from 10% all the way up to, I think, 92, 95%. And a lot of folks did not talk about what the proportion would be for hospitality. Those that did, those are the orange bars in the back. So some folks are a little bit outnumbered by how many hospitality or seasonal staff they have, and others, it's just a tiny fraction. It's just 5%. So there's a range there as well.
Ben, could you define what you mean by hospitality staff?
I think that's a question for Nanci. Nanci, can you define?
Nanci,
Yes,
sorry.
these are hospitality or seasonal staff, cooking, cleaning. That would be more tied to the business when you have retreats, when you have hosted gatherings or programs, as opposed to administrative base.
Any other questions about this one? Okay, I'm going to jump to the next. We asked if folks were outsourcing any of their key operational functions like catering or facilitation of programs or laundry. And several mentioned accounting, housekeeping, laundry, certainly some extra services like massage or yoga, some catering and food service, and one center mentioned landscaping. But for the majority of respondents, these outsourced contracts were under 5% of the budget. So it's just this little sliver at the edge. The center that had the biggest was at 25%. We asked a question about staff hours per year that are offered in kind. So this would include volunteers, but it would also be folks who are paid through some sort of residential, room and board, something. And who do not receive a cash payment. Many centers responded with none. They aren't doing this at all. And then there were some who had just a few hours, less than 50 hours a year. So just, a couple of one-off volunteers. And then others, we had 2 centers that responded with 4,000 hours, and a bit of a range in between there. The average from these few responses that we got was around 1,200, but it shows that there really is quite a range. I'd be curious to hear more about how those models are structured and how folks have gotten into those models, but we can get to that. these are the pieces that Nanci has verbalized a little bit already. We took these categories from the RCC community survey responses that we received earlier this year, where we saw how things were spread out, and so we could actually divide them and say, well, here's small, medium, and large in terms of the maximum accommodation capacity in single rooms on the campus. And so of the respondents to this survey, the majority were large centers, so 56 people or more, and the next highest were medium. Not as many small centers were responding to this. And then a couple centers felt like this didn't really apply to the way they structure their beds. So one way we can measure the size of centers is around the beds, the accommodation capacity. Another way that we can measure the size of centers is around the annual operating budget. Neither is really clear cut because and Nanci and I were speaking about this a moment ago, some centers with small budgets still have quite a few beds, and some centers, it's not clear that a small budget equals small beds. So of the centers that responded to this survey, many of them are large. Some are medium, some are small, and then quite a few were very small, less than 250,000 for an annual budget. And then no one said that these categories didn't apply. So this is the range for the folks who are here. Denise, do you want to speak to this?
I'm coming from a different industry, higher education, and it's hard, Ben, to now wrap your arms around revenue and budget when your revenue and budget model could be double or single capacity for the residential area. So I come from higher education, and you have different rates, triples, doubles, singles, but everything has a dollar value. So it's interesting that we're doing small, medium, and large. It's also the preference of the retreatant that comes in. I don't want anything but a single room, i.e. COVID. So I'm specifically talking about your revenue versus capacity. So it's interesting. I would have thought that ours is small and we're at 70 beds, but we're actually in the medium reaching the larger capacity. Just a thought.
Yep. For centers that are a part of the RCC network so far, I think there are some centers that RCC is not connected with that have much larger capacity, or it's structured much differently. So centers that have, 400 or something.
I was going to say as well, to your point, Denise, we're the same. We offer single, double, and triple, and I think many retreat centers do. So when we get to number of beds, we're including there the possibility that that there's a triple situation. So what is your absolute maximum possible? This question asked, especially in light of COVID, if everyone were to ask for single, or if, there were to be a situation of COVID again, where it has to be single, what is your restriction? What is possible there? We, for example, at Tatamagouche Center, we can only offer 26 singles, but we can offer up to 60 if you get to triple. So what we're looking at here is, bed capacity and bed nights, including up to triples, is an income driver that we know. And yet it's not always, as Ben said, directly correlated to our operating budget, because that's, of course, not our only income driver. But it's a really good point, because I think many of us have camps and even a camp-like atmosphere, or a boutique hotel where triples and doubles are possible.
And I know David chimed in. He has a higher ed background. You have almost like an FTE or head count versus capacity, and your literature should speak to both if you want to make sure that you're speaking to all of your audiences. And then when you're getting into planning, having revenue points for all those different options as well.
Exactly. Yeah. And this gets again into benchmarking. I mean, there's so many infinite possibilities when you look at the span of retreat centers that are in our community of communities. And so where we want to get to is a point where we can have meaningful peer groups in which you can drill down and look at things like bed nights for different types of programs, you know, bed nights and participants, day guests versus overnight, et cetera. There's a lot of room once we have meaningful peer groups. But the question is, where do we begin on the peer groups? And I've already started into my thing. I think
I warned them that you were passionate about it, Nanci. It's great. So yeah, so I've shared about the budget. I believe this is the last slide. So I'm going to stop sharing here. That gives you a little bit of the flavor of what we gathered in the poll. And I think for me, it helps give some context to the various requests and topics that are in the room here, so that people are coming from different models with different pain points. And part of us being able to help and connect you with peers where you can have a meaningful discussion is benchmarking, so that we can establish who those groups are. Nanci, do we want to set some time aside here for breakout rooms and some open space to get some of these questions addressed a little bit more before we come back? And I think it might be nice to come back and share learnings, do some harvesting.
I was going to ask some questions related to what I heard in what people were asking. You know, for example, someone asked about outsourcing third parties. Is there anyone here who responded on the survey who more than 25% of your operating budget is outsourcing? Like, just would like to get a sense of, are there people here who have expertise that could kind of lead some of these groups where people are looking for information? Anyone on the call here done quite a bit of outsourcing? So Eve yeah, a couple. And would you be interested in being part of a group that talks about outsourcing?
Sure.
Okay, that's the second one was recruitment. There was a lot of, I think we can just have an open group around recruitment, because there's going to be, we're all experts, pain and pleasure points around recruitment. But how many would be interested in having a group around recruitment specifically? Sonia, you mentioned the other kinds of benefits. Like when you mentioned that, I was thinking, you know, things like being involved in decision-making, or a base salary for seasonal staff or hospitality staff. I'm wondering, does anyone else want to have a conversation around, or even that upstairs, downstairs dynamic that happens in retreat centers? Are there other ways that they're getting benefits or perks, you said, outside of the typical salaries and benefits? Would anyone else like to talk about that? Other kinds of benefits? Caitlin, and maybe interested there too. Was there a direct question around residencies and volunteers or camps? How to manage that, residencies and non-residencies, or was that more of a sharing? Herschel, that was you saying that's what you do, but there wasn't a particular. Okay, just clarifying there. And then there was a lot around succession. How do we, of course, that's related to recruitment, but it's also mentoring, coaching, shadowing. What are all the ways that we build our leadership across the team? And how many are interested in a conversation around succession? Few, yeah, there's a few. And Eve, you might be in too. I mean, the good thing about open space is you can, if we give a good title to the rooms, you can, you know, one of the principles of open space is you can vote with your feet and go to more than one room, share your time between rooms. Yeah, we're all free to do that. And then David at Osage Forest Apiece, you had the question about startup, really around how do you get the engine staffing team going again after COVID. I know we can at Tata talk to, we've had very small, 2 people starting in COVID. Anyone else operating from a very small staff team and growing that small staff teams, like under 5 people, able to support David in their journey right now. We might be a team of 2 then, David. And then the other question is around benchmarking. How many people would like to speak? Or do you want to do that when we come back, Ben? Not have a breakout group, maybe?
Well, yeah, I don't know. A breakout group could be a nice generator for larger discussion afterward.
Okay, let's see if there is, anyone interested in talking about benchmarking? So it's getting at that question of what are the meaningful peer groups? We're talking about staffing, people and culture today, but we're also interested in benchmarking more broadly. Anyone interested in benchmarking? Steve, and we have Bethlehem. Okay, yeah. It's fine to have a small groups, pairs, triads. So is everyone clear on the open space format? We basically have about we have a group on outsourcing to third parties. We have a group on recruitment, succession as a separate group. Wonder if are those the same or we keep them separate?
I have recruitment, succession, benchmarking, growing a small staff, and outsourcing to third parties.
And then the other kinds of benefits, not just salaries and typical benefits, but what are the other ways that we, other incentives, other benefits? Sonia, am I doing justice to your? Might be part of culture there as well. Okay.
So I've created these rooms and you will have the opportunity to choose them and to continue to keep choosing them even after you get into one. So if you get into one and you want to pop out and go to another one, you'll have the opportunity to control that from the menu bar at the bottom. So I'm going to open these rooms and yeah, invite you to see if you can find how to get there. Do you have them in your bar at the bottom?
And how long?
I set them for 10 minutes. I think we could go for 15 or even 20, but it depends on how many folks get into some of the rooms.
I start. Yeah, can everyone see the breakout rooms? Great.
Aaron, do you want to pause the recording here? Thank you. So welcome back from our breakout rooms. I'm curious how that went. I only gave you 12 and a half minutes. I apologize. Was it enough time? No, it was not. It was okay. I know we had a couple groups that were a bit larger, 6 people. And I think we lost Nanci, and there's Nanci. Okay, good. Nanci, you made it back. And there's, yes, and also Dr. Nanci, many Nancys. Nanci,
I told you that you might be able to.
Go ahead. I was asking if folks had had enough time in the breakout rooms for some of the topics, and I don't know that they did, but I think we might narrow down some of what from our discussion so far.
Sorry about that, folks. Okay, everyone will appreciate this. We're in the middle of a green retrofit and we have an electrical upgrade. So the electrical just shut down our crap. Can't get onto the internet.
Are you back?
Street Center.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's fun. I'm glad you're here for as long as you can be till the next thing strikes. Aaron and I are worried that our power is going to go out with the snow coming through. So What were some takeaways from, I'm specifically curious about the benchmarking and the growing a small staff, some of the smaller conversations. Anything that you pulled out of those that you want to share with the larger group?
I mean, I made a friend.
That's always good.
And my boss is on here, Sister J. Marie. I met somebody who does software with registrations, and we'll talk offline, but I made a friend and we're gonna meet next week. So there you go.
Nice.
I was mostly hoping to connect with centers to see how they think about benchmarking amongst programs. So I'm not with the center, I'm with a company that makes technology solutions for retreat centers. And we're often wondering, like, how do retreat centers see themselves? What are they using? Like, is bed nights a relevant factor? Is it the number of programs, the registration, staffing, budget? Like, there's all kinds of variables, and there's good reasons to prioritize different ones. So just curious, that's all.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
As Danya says in the chat. Yes. Yep.
We had a really good discussion in the small staffing group, particularly around that question around how to maintain staff when you don't necessarily always need them 5 or 6 or 7 days a week. And so, or certain seasons when you might have a downtime, those kind of things. And so a couple folks had some ideas, things like having a pool of labor, or also having sort of a base number of hours per week that people would work, be guaranteed to work, and then if they're not doing the specific job, that they would do something else. And so I think that was really helpful for me to hear, but then also to think about, like, what I said was thinking about what are our strengths right now as far as what I can bring, what our current staff can bring, and where are the areas that we need more strength. And so focusing as we grow that staff, focusing on those areas where we need to strengthen the programming.
I'm wondering if there are overlaps there with the outsourcing conversation. Any best practices around when to choose to outsource or where outsourcing works the best?
It came up in our talk about cleaning, outsourcing cleaning fees. And we talked about how it's kind of nice that another group can take care of if someone is sick or out. You know, they're still responsible for getting the cleaning done. Whereas if it's in-house and it's out, then you're in for it, you know. But then also I'm getting sidetracked on the comments here, because just at the very end of our conversation, I mentioned that we did learn that if we separate cleaning fees out of our lodging, that we don't have to pay tax on cleaning fees. And the 2 people I was in the group with said that they don't have to pay tax on lodging because they're 501c3. And we are as well, but in my understanding, we have to pay tax on lodging fees. Does anybody else have to do that?
I apologize. I misspoke, or kind of like got kind of like ahead of myself. But there's no hospitality tax in the state of Illinois. That's what I don't pay. I do pay like sales tax for items sold in my gift shop. So, but yeah, that's where I'm at.
So maybe Georgia has a different, does anybody else who 501c3 pay tax on their lodging fees?
We do in PA. In Pennsylvania, we pay on both the sale of food as well as a bed tax.
Okay.
In Canada, I don't know if it's relevant, but we don't pay tax if it's if it's a program, a learning program, but we do if it's a third party.
Okay. Sorry to stray the conversation. I just got like, I hope I haven't been paying tax all these years, and I do. But I think Georgia has those rules where I have to pay tax on gift shop and lodging. But anyway, going back to the outsourcing, it is nice to outsource because of it just takes off the pressure of having to find more employees, which I think everybody here has had trouble finding employees. And if you outsource it to somebody else, it's their company that has to find the employees and not you. You just have to pay the company to do it.
Maybe we can jump to the succession group. Any learnings that came out of that conversation? I think we had 4 folks there. It doesn't have to be just the pearls of wisdom. It can be something random.
Yeah, it felt like we were just getting into it.
Yeah.
Because there was 4 of us, so we were just sharing a bit about, you know, the types of challenges we have, but we didn't get too far.
So we may have time to jump back in if there are folks who'd still like to continue that. I have a sense that that's the same for the group who was talking about recruitment, because there were 6 in that group. Would you agree?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Nanci, what do you think would be best? Open space within open space.
Why don't we have a show of hands? Would we like to go back and take some more time? I was actually coming out to say, I think we could use a bit more time.
Yeah, fair.
Out entirely.
Yeah.
So, how many would like to go back and have a longer conversation in the smaller groups? Maybe just give us an actual hand or a virtual hand. If you'd like a bit more group time.
Don't.
Yeah, that's fine.
That's fine. Low enthusiasm on that. That's fine. I wonder if we might then move over to more of the benchmarking discussion, which I think would be really valuable. Yeah.
Absolutely.
What would be most supportive for you, Nanci, to lead a little more of that? I'm assuming we would like to do a little bit more of that categorization of who are peer groups.
Yeah, and it could be, I'd like to start the conversation about what meaningful, what would be the meaningful groups. And we had let me just say that what led me kind of just a very, I mentioned it in my small group, but just to say that one of the things that really lit me up as an ED was the knowledge that we were operating with a very small team and very little resources. And when I started to hear other retreat centers saying that they spent 50 or more percentage of their operating budget on staffing, it made me realize, wow, we are operating on fumes. And I need to go to my board and say that. Like, it gave me a bit of political, you know, information. And so this is the kind of thing that I think can be really powerful for us. And the starting point is back to that conversation about the meaningful peer groups. Our assumption is that bed nights is one of the drivers of income. Another thing that we talk about is occupancy rates, which is of course a factor of bed capacity. So we're not trying to find the magic ratio that tells us whether we're successful or not. We're trying to find what is the question, or what is the factor that helps us determine who our peers are. So so the bed nights was one of the questions, and the other question, like Ben had outlined, was the operating budget. Yeah, so maybe we can just open up a little bit of a discussion there. What we noticed in the responses is there are anomalies. We're one of them. We're moderate in terms of our operating revenue because we have other forms of revenue outside, and we're very small when it comes to bed capacity. So let's open up a discussion for what would be meaningful. We heard someone say that rural urban. Now that might be something that comes out that is like a sub discussion or subcategories within the small, medium, large, or very small, small, medium, large. But let's open it up. Let's hear from people what you have to say about what would be meaningful to benchmark for.
I guess I have a question that you kind of triggered as you were speaking. And that is occupancy rate, you know, so what is the best benchmark? And the reason I'm asking that is our center is on the property of a religious community who obviously is doing multiple studies of space and usage of space, etc. And frequently what's used as benchmark is the hotel benchmark. And our response always is, you can't use that because we're not a hotel. So what is the retreat center benchmark? And is it different? How does it differ on the basis of the kind of programming that a group offers? And so how do you determine that? Or is there any information about that? Because it's difficult when you're compared to industries that don't apply to you.
Exactly. And exactly, Jane Marie, I think that's exactly where we are. I think it's very difficult for us to say there is a benchmark of occupancy that makes sense for all of our different animals of retreat centers and retreat center communities. So where we want to begin to move toward that understanding is to have meaningful peer groups where, let's just give an example. I could say within my small retreat center peer group, for us at Tatamagouche Center, we seem to break even at 500 bed nights a month, for example. So I use 500 as 100% occupancy and work toward that. That's our own. We have nothing to compare it to, and that's what I would like. But I think once we start to build out this benchmarking, we will be able to say, well, yes, you have a higher number of bed nights occupancy rate because you have a larger capacity, you're in an urban center, you're near, we can then account for some anomalies. But I would say we're far from saying, I don't think there would be a magic number, but we would have more meaningful discussions about what our points are, what helpful management information and decision-making information. I think it's a very good question.
Nanci, one thing to add to that, because we spent quite a bit of time looking at occupancy last year and our pricing strategy. And one of the things that we had to build into that were turnover days and resiliency days. So when you say 100%, like making sure that we're talking about what, apples to apples with what 100% is, because really for us, it's like 80% is our 100. Because we know the team needs breaks, and we know that especially post-COVID, and we know that we have turnover days. So that was helpful to determine that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And for us, the 500 would include that. Like, we have much more capacity than 500 nights per month, but 500 was basically our best performance.
Right.
And that included, we have roughly 2 days turnover. Yeah, but I agree. And those are the things I think we can get granular on and really help each other around pricing strategies, around our social business model, our business lines. We look at, for example, our bed nights, our guests every month by each business line. And we're able to compare how to hosted gatherings compared to learning programs, compared to day visits like yoga or quilters. And it's very it's very helpful, those kinds of, but that's just within ourselves. So I think these kinds of things, like you're saying, how you do your occupancy, how each of us does, would be so fascinating in our peer groups. So back to the question of meaningful peer groups, what would be a meaningful peer group for you to have a conversation like this peer to peer? And we know that there's lots of ways to break down, from, you know, geographical to faith-based, et cetera. But remembering that we can always drill down within what's the most meaningful umbrella to have that initial conversation, as we're doing now across communities and types of retreat centers.
For me, one would definitely be a faith-based group, or where the retreat center is heavily sponsored by an external organization. In our case, it would be a group of sisters, their order, which I know it is applicable to many of us, but there may be other, like a university, for example, may not be faith-based, but it is helping to sponsor a retreat center. So anything in that composite, Nanci, I think would be helpful for us, because we don't stand independently. I also had just one little quick extra about the comment of not using hotels as a benchmark. I think that's applicable in some cases, but there are certain aspects. I used to work in hotels. There's certain things in hotels that we could use. For example, a cost per occupied room. You know, if you put together how much is the cost per that night in that room, given your laundry, your housekeeping, your registration, those sorts of things. So I encourage us not to throw out the baby with the bathwater. I think there are still some examples that we could use as benchmarks from hotels, but not exclusively apples for apples. Maybe a fruit salad in between.
Mm-hmm.
Nanci, I find what's a kind of faith tradition affiliation a more helpful grouping than geography. Another kind of grouping would be, does the center gear itself more towards adult or youth?
Oh, good point.
That impacts a lot in terms of programming, you know, what the facility looks like. So kind of the demographic that the retreat center reaches out to would be something else to consider.
Yeah. I was thinking along similar lines, and what I was thinking is maybe retreat centers, maybe it should not be like identifying your peer group or whatever that is, but just I'm remembering, and maybe Ben can chime in about what the survey was, maybe like 6 or 10 months ago. That seemed like it would be an annual survey, and there were some of these questions about, you know, who is your main clients and some of these other things, and maybe adding some of these metrics to the survey as well would be beneficial, and having standardized calculations of like what are bed nights per month occupancy rate or something like that, the break even point that you talked about, Nanci, the cost per occupied room. These are all great things. And so I don't currently calculate any of them, but I'm gonna start. And I think that would be a good thing in terms of benchmarking, is if we knew, and I don't know how you do your survey, Ben, I forget, but if it was like filterable, if it was like available in an Excel sheet or something, and you could say, I want to look at retreat centers that have this, you know, this range of beds and serve youth, or this range of beds and identify as religious, and look at what their bed nights per month look like, and look at what their break-even point looks like. So maybe some more knowledgeable folks than me could suggest other categories that would be good for these like hard metrics.
Yeah, I'll chime in, Scott. Thank you. That's part of the motivation for this discussion, is that before we do our next survey, maybe in a year or so, we'd like to do a demographics focused survey or a benchmarking focused survey where we can drill in more on those specifics. And we also have been hearing the request for an Excel sheet that we can crunch individually to answer our own questions. And so those are now available on the link that I just put in the chat for the past 3 surveys. There's stuff that you can pull out and analyze in your own way. But yes, we would love to have some of this cost per occupied room, those types of things in there as well, so that you can match up and say, okay, for a center who's located in this region and who has self-identified as X, Y, and Z and does this kind of programming, how are they stacking up certain costs?
And I guess the question of the larger peer groups, that it's absolutely valid what you're asking, Scott. That's an ability to kind of drill down and find, you know, these particular questions. And I guess the assumption we had is that that could be possible along with ability to actually gather like this around certain peer groups. You know, again, to say, I'll give you another example, and I'm staying with the smaller, medium, large, just for this example, looking for us looking at the other small centers and what those that identified that they were thriving, because many of us said we're holding even or we're struggling. So those small centers that said they were thriving, then I'm curious to know, okay, well, are you dealing with youth or adults? Do you have a residency program? Are you making effective use of volunteers? So I think there's a distinction between the bigger, meaningful peer group and then the factors or the drivers. You know what I mean? I think there's the comparability, and then within that, there's all kinds of drivers, and that's going to be pretty infinite. Looking at our group, you know, are you involved in justice? Are you involved in camps, summer camps, outdoor education, land-based learning, et cetera, et cetera? So I think the ability to drill down gives us smaller subgroups, but I'm curious about the much larger that really spans, you know, hundreds of centers for meaningful ratios and things that helps us reflect back. And ask meaningful questions about what we're doing. If that makes any sense.
One kind of reaction that I'm having to what you just said, Nancy, at Retreat Guru, one of the ways we think of the different centers that we work with is by the business model. So if a center is primarily a venue for hire and most of their programming is hosted groups, we consider that very different than a center where they have, say, their flagship programs, or they do in-house retreats, or they do a lot of online retreats. So that's just one kind of higher level distinction.
Yeah, absolutely.
And because I think there might be more commonality between centers that operate as, say, like a venue for hire, even if they're from different, even if they have a different thematic focus.
Yeah, or
like they might be different. That's what I mean, like a different retreat type. Like they may come from different faiths or different spiritual lineages, but their business model may have a lot in common, and maybe they have more in common with someone who's within their lineage but offers a totally different retreat experience, or has a different operating model.
The only thing that twigs for me is I think most of us offer third party gatherings as an income stream. I think it varies widely. For us, it has really grown, and it's been a very important complement to our own mission-driven programs, land-based learning, et cetera. I hate for you to separate those folks out, because from a management perspective, what I want is management levers. I want to know what's the sweet spot at Tatamagouche Center for living into our mission and values while having other kinds of revenue that might, you know, that is aligned. You see where I'm going?
Yep.
So I think we don't want to separate ourselves out so much. Another example, we don't have residencies. I don't want you to put all the people in residencies together, because I want to learn from them, because that's a management lever for us. Can residencies and volunteer capacity enhance our small staffing ability.
Mm.
So I think we have to be careful not to be chronically unique, if you know what I mean, from a benchmarking for management purposes, because we can all learn from those that are thriving with certain management levers. That's what I think is important for the Retreat Center Coalition, if you know what I mean. So I think they have to be big enough to scoop up a lot of different experiences, but meaningful enough that we can see ourselves in it. And I don't have any answers to what that is. I just crave it as a director.
Tempted to share screen of just for this one slide, which shows the various ways that people have split that percentage between in-house and external. And so it's just this huge range where some are 100% in-house and the average is 40, and then some have none. And it's like everything in between. There's not a real clear like two trends. So it would be challenging to split, I feel.
That's also a really political one, because as we know, different retreat centers have experimented with moving away from their own programming to all hosting. And it's a very big discussion. Anyway, love to hear from others around meaningful peer groups, or how you would want to use it as a manager, as a program director, as an executive director. How would you? I've given some many of you have given examples. What would be useful to you?
Two things come to mind for me. One is, I know there are resources, and obviously some were suggested, but if anybody does do resources, use a resource to help determine effective occupancy rates, et cetera, that would be helpful. Extremely helpful for me anyway. The other thought I had, and I guess this is just a suggestion for future surveys, definition of terms is extremely important. I was struck by that when the definition of hospitality was given as food service, cleaning staff. My definition of hospitality was the person that greets a group, who welcomes a group. And I'm sensing that maybe that was administrative in another interpretation. So we're not necessarily comparing apples to apples without definitions. I would just strongly recommend that. And I know that gives more verbiage, and I hate reading the verbiage. I like to just answer the questions, but it also would make it more meaningful, I think.
Yeah, that's very, very helpful and very, very true. Any other comments about what would be helpful for you around benchmarking a peer group for management, or pricing, or your business model, your social business model? Just out of curiosity, how many people do calculate occupancy rate, if you feel comfortable sharing? How many of the retreat centers calculate? No, so it's not even a very widely used. It's interesting. How many do bed nights of some sort? Calculate bed nights, or bed nights for different. Interesting. Maybe, I mean, we're only on the last 6 minutes, but I was going to say, I'm curious for different people what your how you assess success. So if we look at a month and it's high revenue, we then compare it to bed nights and number of guests. What would you look at? Would it be number of guests? Would it be, or do you have other ways of?
Nanci, one thing I appreciate about the conversation is kind of how do we measure, and getting some new ideas for how to measure like bed nights. I'm thinking, yeah, or like when you say occupancy, I know there's one time of the year, a particular program where I'm very attentive to occupancy rates, or we have a Hermitage here. I pay attention to occupancy rates, but then I don't pay attention to that as much with other programs. So what we pay attention to a lot here, for instance, is average attendance on our retreats.
Mm-hmm.
That's really easy to convert into one of the measurements that you're asking, but we pay more attention to average attendance.
So like number of people that have attended a program, like 25 or 50.
Yeah, because our programming is very consistent. So it's how many people on each weekend retreat. And I know what I'm looking for, our target number and stuff in the sweet spot and everything.
Right. And they always stay at your center? The programs? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we're mostly weekend overnight retreats.
Right. So yours would be equivalent, whereas our bed nights we have many people who would come in for the day. So our number of guests doesn't equal those who stay and pay for lodging or even catering. So that's why we do bed nights.
Yeah, and the same for us, Nanci. Like we'll have like 3 small groups to maximize occupancy on a weekend or something. And so making sure that we're looking at it, more on a month-to-month basis, or like just different ways to look at the information to make sure that we're seeing the whole picture of how we're maximizing our spaces and beds.
That's helpful. Yeah, another thing we're looking at related to occupancy is during the week occupancy. We tend to be weekends, and I think a lot of retreat centers are the same. We do a lot of weekend programming and we don't maximize the weeks. That may be a rest for your staff, but we're looking at things like, an accessible spa that would bring people during the week and be an income source. Anyway, just curious how people measure. That's the crux of it. I think we've opened the conversation.
We rely on our financial statements, just looking at that. It's interesting to see more of how people are breaking out the financial statements into different, but we definitely look at what we brought in for meals and what we charged, what we paid for meals in the kitchen and all these different metrics for that part of it. And but basically at the end of the month, did we make enough money to pay the bills? Financial statements.
Definitely.
Yeah.
That's what, when you first asked Nanci, how do we measure success? I immediately thought, if I can write a check to pay off part of the deficit at the end of the month.
Right.
Is there enough to pay X amount? Or did we bring enough, or do I have to borrow some from my money market and then pay it later? That's what first popped in my mind.
Yeah. I think I'm assuming the finances, and against that, are you comparing it to anything? Like if you break even, or if you have losses, or if you have revenue, are you looking at anything? Again, I'm thinking of management levers. What can I change to tweak this social business model? Sure. That's what I'm curious about from other centers. I know what we do, and I think it's pretty, it's pretty basic. But anyway, I think this is a great start. We have a lot of, and we have a lot of different retreat centers doing different things, but I think we've opened the conversation and continuing to talk about what matters and what we measure and what's meaningful to talk about together about what measures. We'll continue to have these conversations. Yeah, very helpful. Yeah, someone mentioned hospitality and lodging are only part of your income. And for some of you, there's other things that you're doing, other revenue streams that are unrelated to your beds and your lodging. Absolutely.
If I could just ask one question, and sorry that I was face off for a while. I'm curious to know what kind, for those of you who provide food for your guests, what kind of menu, are you vegetarian? Do you serve meat? We've saved money by going to non-vegetarian menu, but we also have challenges because we offer gluten-free, dairy-free, and vegan. So that often means sort of making two different types of meals, and I wonder how people handle that.
With great expense.
We've had some real issues with people requesting and expecting a wide cadre of options. And our food service caterers have asked us to limit it to medical dietary restrictions. That's, and when the groups have to give their confirmations, they have to tell us, are there any medical dietary restrictions? Vegetarian or vegan is not a medical dietary restriction. We have more than enough food that they can make choices. Our menus are exactly what the sisters get. So like a group cannot come in and say, oh, we want this option. They're not going to get it. They're going to get, I guess, potluck, you know, what my mother used to call it. Whatever's being served at that meal, that's what you're getting. And we've adjusted to that. I think our groups have somewhat adjusted to it fairly well, but that's pretty much where we limit it. And if there's not a medical dietary restriction, and they're not allowed to bring in their own food either. So there's more than enough choices. If somebody's diabetic, somebody wants, now gluten-free, that's a medical dietary restriction. So we have a separate toaster, separate toast, separate waffles. We do have different things that can be made that way, and certain meals are made that way. You know, so that's kind of how we're dealing with it.
Donna, for us, we have a very standard menu. It's the same menu each weekend. And there's always some options and a decent salad bar for folks. And although we ask folks ahead of time if they have any special dietary restrictions, we always, on the night that they arrive, ask them to touch base with the chef. And I'm surprised that he never seems fazed by request, whether it's gluten-free, vegetarian, or vegan. And somehow he seems to work with that okay. And but like it's never more, like a lot of those requests would be a handful of people, 5 or 6 on a weekend. The majority of people are happy with the buffet line that we provide.
I see we're at the end of our time here. Honored that you all chose to join this conversation. Really appreciate everyone chiming in and sharing. A lot to learn here. Aaron and I will share some notes and a video recording back out. To respond to David's question in the chat, there is a conversation happening next month to encourage more mentorship and partnership between young centers or new centers or imagined centers or new center directors and folks who are more established or senior elders, trying to do that intergenerational thing here at RCC, keep people in touch with each other as these changes happen. Folks are wanting different kinds of menu options. There's a lot to respond to. I also put in the chat our next call at the end of the month, and I look forward to seeing you all soon. Take care and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye.